All right, friends, we are getting into it today. Anatomy of the larynx. Don't be mad, somebody asked for it, so I'm doing it. Welcome back to Singing Tips with LJDstudios, the space where we take difficult singing concepts like anatomy and break them down so you can actually understand and implement them for better singing. I'm Laura, and today, don't worry, we're going to keep it simple, but we are going to talk some basic anatomy of the larynx so you can just sort of understand, like, how does this thing even work? Maybe it'll help your singing. If that's too much for you, I vacillate on the anatomy stuff. Like, if you love to geek out on that, I think it will help your singing. If you're like, I find that overwhelming and confusing, I'll be the first one to say skip this video and go on to another one, okay? But if you are interested in the basic anatomy of your larynx and how it works for singing, that's what we're getting into. But before we do, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And if you haven't already, download my free guide, The Three-Tiered Approach to Becoming a Better Singer, linked in the description. Additionally, if you find you are getting valuable content on this channel and you'd like to dive a little deeper, check out my membership option. You will get direct feedback on your singing from yours truly at a fraction of the cost of private lessons. So make sure to check that out as well. And without further ado, let's get into it. Anatomy of the larynx. This is not your full scale anatomy video. I don't even have one of those larynx structures to show you. But sometimes I get a little lost in those, if I'm honest, because there's too much detail. So the point here is to just kind of give you a very broad overview of some of the key players involved in the anatomy of the larynx for singing, okay? So your larynx is here. It's largely made up of cartilage. There's also muscles, there's also bones, but largely made up of cartilage. It is the doorway to your trachea, which is your windpipe, and the esophagus, which is behind it, which is where food and drink go, okay? Your vocal cords are housed within the structure of the larynx above the windpipe, right? So that's how you make sound, right? Air comes up through the trachea, passes through the vocal cords, the vocal cords vibrate, you make sound, okay? So that just kind of gives you a very basic rundown, right, of how that works. Trachea, esophagus, your esophagus, not where your vocal cords are. So if you were drinking tea with honey, great, knock yourself out if that feels good. You're not passing it over your vocal cords, okay? Because your vocal cords, right, are at the top of your trachea. I digress. The main component of your larynx is made up of two cartilages. The top one is your thyroid cartilage. Most people are familiar with that because sometimes when we have health problems, we sort of look into problems with the thyroid. But the top one is your thyroid cartilage. And then the one beneath that is your cricoid cartilage. Okay? So those are the two big cartilages that make up a lot of the structure of the larynx. On the cricoid cartilage, if I just remove my fake thyroid cartilage, there are two sort of pointy cartilages known as the arytenoid cartilages. Okay, so you've got thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, arytenoid cartilages. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the muscles that connect them here in just a moment. But those are the three key cartilages to kind of have in mind when it comes into the anatomy, of the larynx. There's also one bone that I think is important to know about, which is the hyoid bone. So here's your pretend larynx, thyroid cartilage. The hyoid bone, it's almost kind of like a wishbone, is above the thyroid cartilage. Now there's like some membrane stuff that connects the hyoid bone to the thyroid cartilage. But so your larynx is here, and then there's this bone here that it is suspended from, okay? That bone is important because on the top part of that bone, the root of your tongue muscles attach. Okay, so your tongue is attached to the hyoid bone and your larynx is attached to the bottom of the hyoid bone, if that makes sense, okay? So we talk a lot about the tongue in singing because it attaches to the same bone as the larynx. So when you move the tongue, you have the potential, what does muscle do? Muscle moves bone. So when you move the muscles of the tongue, it has the potential to move the hyoid bone, which is then going to move the larynx, okay? So it's all connected. But that's the only bone that I think is like really super important to highlight. Maybe others would disagree with me, but that's where that's the main one that I think about. It's a huge impact on the way the larynx moves. The way the larynx moves is going to have an impact on the way the vocal cords function and vibrate for singing, which is what we're about to get into. Okay, before we get into the muscles involved in singing, or the muscles of the larynx involved in singing, let's just talk about where the vocal cords attach. So we talked about you've got your thyroid cartilage, your cricoid cartilage, and then the arytenoid cartilages that are the little horns at the back. So your vocal cords attach at the front to the thyroid cartilage and the back to the arytenoid cartilages. That's important to keep in mind as we get into the major muscles involved in singing, okay? So first muscle let's talk about is the cricothyroid muscle. What I love about anatomy is it's very literal. So you know about the cricoid cartilage and the thyroid cartilage. The cricothyroid muscle connects the two, okay, or moves them. So what happens when the cricothyroid muscle engages, it moves the thyroid cartilage down and forward. Now remember, your vocal cords attach at the front to the thyroid cartilage and at the back to the two arytenoid cartilages, just like this, right? So you can imagine two little horns at the back, that's where they're attached there, and then the front is the thyroid cartilage. That's sort of where the Adam's apple is, right there. So when that cricothyroid muscle engages, it pulls the front of the vocal cords down and forward, but the arytenoid cartilages, right, they're still attached to the back. So what does that do? It lengthens, stretches your vocal cords, creates more tension in them. They get longer, they get thinner, and they get more tense. And that creates higher pitches. If you think about a guitar string, right? When you're trying to tune a guitar, if you want the pitch to be higher, what do? You tighten the string, right? So the cricothyroid muscle, it moves your thyroid down and forward, which has the effect of lengthening and thinning your vocal cords for those higher pitches. The next key muscle is the thyroarytenoid muscle. I have mentioned this in countless videos as well. I sometimes refer to it as the TA muscle. Sometimes I just call it the thickening muscle. So the CT muscle, or the cricothyroid muscles we just spoke about, is the thinning muscle for your high notes, right? And then the TA muscle, or the thyroarytenoid muscle, is your thickening muscle for your low notes. So again, let's be very literal. Thyroarytenoid. The thyroarytenoid muscle attaches your thyroid cartilage to your arytenoid cartilages. What it does is it pulls your arytenoid cartilages forward. So that's going to shorten your vocal cords, right? Because again, they're attached at the front to the thyroid cartilage and at the back to the arytenoid cartilages. So if the arytenoid cartilages move forward, the vocal cords are going to get shorter and thicker. That's going to help with your lower sounds. Now, this muscle also has the ability to sort of rotate the arytenoid cartilages, which also helps in bringing the vocal cords together, okay? And the amount of time your vocal cords spend closed versus open also sort of influences the tone that you produce, okay? So to keep it simple, think of your thyroarytenoid muscle as the muscle, again, that creates those shorter vocal folds, and then think of your cricothyroid muscle as the one that creates your longer vocal folds, right? Longer is for higher pitches, shorter is for lower pitches, okay? The last thing to consider in all of this is vocal cord closure. So your vocal cords, they're like this, right? And when they are closed all the way, like when you hold your breath, right, there's no sound. What we do in singing is there is initially a muscular action that brings your vocal cords together. This is in part done by the thyroarytenoid muscle. It is also in part done by the cricoarytenoid muscles. So singing is what we would refer to as a muscular aerodynamic event. Muscles bring the cords together, but then it is air that gets them to vibrate. So this is, I think, sometimes where we get in trouble in singing is we have these muscles, right? The cricoarytenoid muscles and then the thyroarytenoid muscle that brings the vocal cords together, but then we kind of want them to like butt out a little bit, right? We don't want them squeezing, yanking, whatever. So those muscles are important, but it's important to keep in mind they do their one-time thing of bringing the cords together, and then after that, it's up to the air to create that open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close effect that happens so rapidly when we're singing. Okay, so just keep in mind, like there's no muscle in the world that can vibrate at the thousands of times per second that needs to occur in order for you to sing some of the pitches that you are going to ultimately want to sing. All right, so that's sort of your very basic rundown of laryngeal anatomy. To recap, thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, at the back, arytenoid cartilages. The cricothyroid muscle attaches thyroid to cricoid cartilage, and it makes your vocal cords long and thin. The thyroarytenoid muscle attaches the arytenoid cartilages to the thyroid cartilages, pulls the arytenoid cartilages forward, creates shorter and thicker vocal folds for your lower tones. Also helps in bringing the vocal cords together, which is important for the onset of phonation. However, it's airflow that keep your vocal cords moving, vibrating. Lastly, the entire structure of your larynx attaches to the hyoid bone, underneath the hyoid bone, above the hyoid bone, the tongue attaches. So movement in the tongue is going to influence movement in the larynx. And as you've seen, the larynx needs to be able to move in order to get your vocal cords into the shapes they need to get into to make the sound you want to produce. Woo! I hope that wasn't too much. I hope that was just the right amount. Let me know if you have questions, and happy singing.